Up here in Canada, she's a little frosty, boys. I'm gonna yank off the tarp and show you guys what this shit box is all about. Cold start in the old beast. She's been sitting in the backyard in the snow for a while. She's fairly chilly. Well, it's actually warm for Alberta right now, but she's a cold car.
24 degrees of timing, boys. 1.5 cranks in, she lit. That's not too damn bad. I did give her a little sniff of ether though, but no grid heater, not too bad.
Trying to haul that thing out of the snow. She didn't want to come out of the big ruts. Had to jack her up now. Put some crap under there, we'll get her out.
She's got some speed holes in her. A little bit more lightweight. I just rattle canned over all that, so she looks good from 20 feet away. As you can see, we put the Coalstang on a pretty severe weight loss program. There ain't much left inside here. If you want to go fast or cheap, that's how you do it, man. No weight. And I still got a little bit of crap to remove. Still got the seat belt things in the back there. I'm not done yet with the weight loss. She got some speed holes up here too, nice and lightweight on the nose. Bought some used drag radials off of a guy, 275 60-15s fit on the stock 10 holes, no problem. This is the donor vehicle I bought for $1,500. It had about 400,000 kilometers on it. I think that's about 280,000 miles. Ran pretty good. Trans, I believe, was like an original trans because I had to throw a new O-ring in the overdrive piston and she's worn out, man. The frictions look like the steels. But this is extreme budget, so I just slammed her back together, cranked up the line pressure. It had a fancy stereo in it, so I pulled that, sold it for $300. I pulled the engine and trans out of this. I sold the rolling chassis for $950. So, man, it didn't cost me much. Again, this was an extreme budget build car. I wanted to try to do it for nothing, so this was a great truck to start with. That's the stereo I pulled out, sold it to my buddy Joel. What else? This thing had an S-Bar coolant heater on it as well, and I took that off and I traded that for a Flaming River steering rack and some other parts. Here I pulled the whole front end off. I ended up using a combination of, this was a two-wheel drive. I used one of the motor mounts on this thing, and I had some motor mounts from a 4x4 version flipped upside down and backwards, and it just used whatever mounts it took to get it in the right spot. This was the night I slammed the engine and transmission in there. It only took about 10 minutes to do this whole process, and I thought it was going to take a long time. I had a couple sauce pops in me, figured it would take a while, but man, I jacked the back of the car up as high as I could, stuffed that thing down in there on a pretty steep angle. Because the back of the car was up in the air, I could swing the thing sideways, and it just dropped down in there. Like I had to kind of crunch it, and it scraped on the rad support. But it was like a blink of an eye, man, and the thing was sitting in there, and it was crazy how much room I had because I hadn't really clearanced anything yet. It's really ridiculous, the engine bay size and the trans tunnel size on the Fox bodies. Like, the thing fit. It was just hilarious. So I sat back and laughed and looked at it, and then the project kept on going. This, I took a stock trans cross member. We boxed it in. My cousin Eric welded it in for me. I would just make templates out of cardboard and then cut it out of steel, and he'd buzz it up for me. Again, it's extreme budget, so I was trying to use everything I could from the original car. So there was a lot of compromises made, but just made it happen. Here's me building the motor mount templates out of cardboard. Then he has a plasma table, which was so wicked. So we would buzz out these cardboard shapes that I had drawn, and you can see how nice the motor mounts look. So this was a garage built car in my garage with a angle grinder and a zip disc, but the motor mount part was awesome to have Eric's plasma table. You can see I had to clearance the tunnel a little bit, but man, not a lot. I actually clearanced on the starter there on the way more than I needed to, but you see on the frame rails all that steel that's added. That's not to beef it up. This thing was so freaking rusty. We just slapped some steel on it and welded it over. To get the engine to sit as low as I wanted to, I had to drop the factory rack and pinion about 1.5 inches, and then I moved it ahead about 1.5 inches for oil pan clearance. By doing that, I had to now lengthen my steer shaft. So it was no big deal. Chopped the steer shaft in two. I cut a little piece of cold roll that was 1.75 inches longer. We buzzed that all together. And then I took a piece of pipe, cut it in half, and then sandwiched a piece of pipe on each side of the steer shaft. And Eric welded that up for me. And that's about it. Like, really, motor mounts were done, trans cross member was done, steer shaft was done. Mechanically, that thing was bolted in, and now all I had to do was hook up radiator, fuel, throttle cable, and my shifter. So at this point, I loaded her up, put her on the trailer, took it back to my house, and started to finish the little things. So once I got her home, I started working on hooking up coolant lines. I had to build an upper rad hose, and my radiator and the coolant port on my engine they weren't working together. One's pointing to the passenger side, one's pointing to the driver's side, one was upper passenger side. So figured, screw it, I'm going to chop off that Cummins water neck. I went to Home Depot, got a polyethylene piece of hose barb, JB welded it in that bastard. And then I got another elbow, and I used pieces from the original Ford 5-liter upper rad hose. That's the piece there, JB welded in. That's pieces of the original 5-liter upper rad hose. This was extreme budget, man. I was trying to do it as cheap as possible. All the way through this build, it was like the Cummins was meant to be under the hood of this thing. Look at how my heater core lines lined right up with the Cummins tubing for the heater core. It was hilarious. This was me building my charge tubing. This was an extreme budget car again. I keep saying that. So building an intercooler or buying an intercooler and running all that piping was more weight, more time. I just wanted to get the car on the road. So got some exhaust elbows, slammed that crap together, hooked up a fuel line, hooked up my throttle cable. Car was running. Pretty much the only thing I had left was a drive shaft to do. So I had an old drive shaft I had from a Roadrunner I owned. It was too long, so it was cool. I just cut it down shorter. I used the 1450 U-joint or yoke from the Dodge, and one end was already 1350 on my Roadrunner drive shaft. Had that basically just slammed everything together, hooked up a fuel line, hooked up my trans, the factory Ford trans shifter, totally hillbilly. I made that thing work. I could only get to like D. The shifter just didn't quite work with my Dodge trans pattern. So like I had D, I had drive, I couldn't go to first or second. I could just barely get park. But man, it worked. And I had a lot of fun. I drove it like that. For the first 3 months when I drove this car on the road, I had no working alternator and I had no fan. And it actually was no issue. And I couldn't start it from inside the car. I had to start it from outside the car with a jumper wire. My boys at work were laughing at me. It was hilarious. But I could drive it for about 2 to 3 days between charging because I just wouldn't use my headlights. I wouldn't use the radio or the fan. So I would make it like 3 days between charging. It was funny. What else did I do? I finally hooked up the starter on a switch inside the car, and I never ran a fan the whole first year. When it got crazy hot, I would turn on the interior heater fan, and that would take away enough heat to bring the car down when I was idling in traffic when it was really hot out. But at highway speeds, man, the thing kept totally cool. From there, I started to lighten the car up. I put her on a diet. I chopped the whole front frame off. I went through the whole car and I actually lost about 500 pounds. All the interior pieces you see laying there. I loaded all that crap up into my wife's Yukon and drove to the scale and weighed the vehicle. And then I unloaded everything and then went back and weighed it again. So I gutted the doors. I lost about 30 pounds per door. I took off the GT ground effects kit. I rattle can spray painted everything at the bottom just to cover up all that crap. It's a pretty ratty car, but from 20 feet away, it looks not bad. I mounted the battery in the trunk. That helps for weight bias. I took out the stock radiator and I put in a little tiny Polaris Razor 800 radiator. The thing keeps the car cool. It's hilarious. And then basically that's how it is now. I drive it. I race it. Best it's done is 12.0 at 121 miles per hour in the quarter mile. It's actually pretty quick. It gets about 40 miles per gallon on the highway. All in, I'm about $3,500 total investment after, like, I sold the GT ground effects kit. I sold the interior. I sold the carpet. I sold, I was trying to do this for zero, so I kind of made it happen. All in, I'm about $3,500 total investment in the car. So I'm pretty happy. And here I'm showing 28 pounds per door. I gutted the doors. There's still some weight left. I'm going to go weight loss program stage 2 this winter. I'm going to carve it down a little bit more. But my wife and my wife's been awesome, helping me with the car, putting up with all my BS all the time. I love my wife. But yeah, future goals for the car, lighten it up a little bit more, put a little bit more fuel to it, put some nitrous to it. My injection pump is capable of about 700 horse to the tire worth of fuel, maybe 800. The injectors I'm running with my injection pump and all the free mods I've done should be able to get me to about, like I said, 700-800 horse to the tire with enough air. So I'm going to be fogging the crap out of it with nitrous. I got a China turbo I'm tossing on there. I'm going to do a bunch more junkyard stuff to make some power, but stock bottom end Cummins, like rods, crank, pistons, 1,000 horsepower to the tire is a freaking joke. So I don't really got to worry about any of that. You can find my car on Instagram under Coalstang and also Facebook under Coalstang. I'm also on YouTube under Coalstang. For the people that are following my build, I thank you guys very much. It's been wicked to talk to people that have been encouraged by the build. There's some really neat builds that are happening that I've been talking to guys behind the scenes. I love that stuff. Love helping guys crank stuff up, make big power, and do it on the cheap. Another thing I'm doing right away, I'll be tossing in a 5,000 RPM governor spring kit, so this thing's going to be buzzing like crazy. I'm going to be tossing in my power-driven diesel, my valve springs. Those guys have helped me out. They got wicked parts, great deals, and they know their stuff. Their injectors, their governor spring kits, anything I can, I buy it from them just because I dig the stuff they're doing with their builds. total weight of the car, I didn't touch on this, but everyone always thinks my car weighs a ton or many tons. Total weight without driver, full of fuel, race weight is 3,064 pounds. That is almost 100% factory suspension, heavy K-frame, heavy lower control arms, heavy cast iron brake calipers, factory wheels. I got a lot of weight I can still drop, so I'm actually thinking this car might end up around 2,900 pounds with nothing too exotic. All factory steel body panels, factory glass. It's 100% factory rear axle. I got some upgrade coming there because I got some crazy deals. I'm going to be updating Instagram and everything with that coming up soon. But keep an eye out for my build. I think there's some neat stuff coming in the future and guys are going to like it. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video.